Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining me tonight, it is Steven Simcox and Derek Johnson. Steven hosts the Locked On Horned Frogs, Locked On Horned Frogs podcast. Derek hosts the Locked On Kansas, Locked On Jayhawks, Locked On Kansas. I'm always bad at these.
Locked On Jayhawks.
Locked On Jayhawks podcast. Guess what, boys? Game day is coming to see these two teams play. Not OU. We're not going to Texas State Fair. We are going this week, College Game Day, to TCU and Kansas. We have our thoughts on the game, where these two teams are, all that coming up next.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Make sure you guys subscribe to not only Locked On Big 12, but Locked On TCU and Locked On Jayhawks as well. So, guys, this week at noon Eastern time, 11 a.m. Central, there is a game between two Big 12 teams that are both ranked inside the top 20 that College Game Day is attending, that has Big 12 title implications, and also Red River is being played at the same time. That is like a crazy statement to make. TCU and Kansas are the two top 20 teams, not OU and Texas. And Steven, I'll go to you first. Like, just the fact that College Game Day is going to this game in Lawrence, Kansas, and that both of these teams are involved is awesome for the league and its future. Because guess which two teams are leaving? OU and Texas. The game is on ABC. So I know it's a big deal. It's still a big deal, even though those teams have had rocky starts. But TCU and Kansas is getting all the shine.
No, it's great. And it's been a really good offseason for the future of the Big 12. I mean, the Pac-12 losing USC and UCLA, showing some vulnerability there, the unstableness of that conference. But, of course, the big question has been, and it's been looming over the conference since those two schools decided they were going to move on to the SEC. You take these two big brands out, what does that leave as far as the future of the league, the eyeballs that are going to be watching, the quality of the football teams? And you have two teams that are really upstarts. I mean, I'll defer to Derek on KU and their season, but I know from hearing you, Josh, and others around the Big 12, there was some optimism, right? Like, we were all like, oh, yeah, that over-under of, I think it was like 2.5 before the season for Kansas. You gotta smash the over there. Like, they're definitely going to win 3 or 4 games. Didn't expect this. Like, didn't expect them to be undefeated at this point in the year. And then for TCU, I mean, I think it was a good first step to take care of business in non-conference play and be 3-0, and you felt good about that. And on Saturday, I mean, completely unexpected, just dismantling Oklahoma and almost hanging 60 points on them. So now you have two really good programs with a ton of energy behind them. The fans are going to be stoked. I know, game day in Lawrence is going to be appointment television. And then the game itself at 11 a.m., hopefully both these offenses play well like they have all year, and it's an entertaining game to watch. But it's great for the league. Yeah, I mean, you really couldn't write a better script than two teams outside of the OU and Texas bubble thriving. And it's not even the ones you might expect, like Oklahoma State and Baylor, even though those programs are having good years as well. It's, TCU and Kansas kind of coming out of nowhere.
And I picked these teams like – I forget where I picked them, but like I picked them between 8th and 10th in the conference this year. That's what these two teams were for me. And Derek, you and I talked, like, I think a couple weeks ago when they were 2-0 or 3-0. I mean, to be all the way here now, it's really funny because them actually getting to 5-0 was not a big story in the conference this week. Like, the number for you, I'm sure it was, but the number one story in the conference this week was what TCU did to Oklahoma. That was number one, in my opinion, a lot of people's opinions, just because it exposed a lot of things. But Kansas gets the 14-11 win over Iowa State. Game day kind of rights the wrong of the Duke game because it was a fun basketball story of them. They take Tennessee and Florida instead, but they're going to a game on FS1 at noon while OU and Texas are playing. I mean, all of it, just all the, even with like, okay, it's game day at Lawrence. It's awesome. But like the entire thing is just, it's kind of bizarro world, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just go back. It feels like this whole thing, the birth of it all was when KU went down to Austin last year and beat Texas, because it feels like that was kind of the birth of the Lance Leipold era and kind of proof of concept there turning into this year, and now circle back, and now instead of being able to, watch on game day, go and seeing someone eating fried butter, you can come to Lawrence and get some Bill Self mac and cheese at 23rd Street Brewery or something, right? So it's just a complete surprise at this point, and it's like impossible here to try to figure out what should be the expectations anymore for KU football. Like, as you keep winning, no longer with you starting 5-0 is it, but can this team make a bowl game? Because if you go 1-6 the last 7 after the way it started, like that's almost going to feel a little bit disappointing. So I kind of wonder too, like not just the environment and everything that's cool about this. I think whoever wins this game between TCU and Kansas, there's going to be real talk about like, okay, Oklahoma State is like the team to beat right now. And that battle for number 2, like they're in it as much as anyone else in the conference.
Yeah, that's the next part of this. Like this game is going to produce a Big 12 title challenger, right? If KU wins this, they are 3-0 in the Big 12. They are bowl eligible. And, it's like, and assuming they win again, you're talking about them having one of the best 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the conference. The other way around, if TCU wins it, and I think if TCU wins it, like there's a certain way they're going to win it to where Steven, we're like, okay, this group is seriously athletic. They are, because I think that's the one thing when you watch this offense, they've got some dudes at every single offensive position, wide receiver, running back. We've had a lot of conversations about Max Duggan, but this is explosive plays to the max. I looked it up today. They have the most plays over 30. There's second most plays in the country over 30 plus yards. And they've played one fewer game than all the teams around them. The only team that has more is Ohio State with 21. I think TCU's at 19. I mean, this game, if Kansas wins it, it's like proof of concept, serious contender. If TCU wins it, it's further proof of what they showed against OU. Like, I think whoever wins this game, Steven, has to be considered as a Big 12 title challenger.
No, I'd agree with that. And it's funny, before the year, I said I thought TCU would go 7-5. And you guys probably don't do this, but I'll speak for myself. Sometimes you throw a prediction out there and you don't really like do a ton of like research, and then later you look back at the schedule and you're like, oh, okay, now I got to figure out where these 7 wins are going to come from. Like I just sort of abstractly said 7-5 because I felt right, but you're like, oh, Oklahoma State, that's tough. OU at home, how are you going to win that? Going to Morgantown, that seems like a tricky game. But if you win your first 2 conference games, stealing one from Oklahoma and beating, a really good upstart Kansas team, then everything looks a lot more manageable just based on, how everyone else is playing. And yeah, the offense has been incredible. I've had to apologize, and I have, to Max Duggan. Like the first few years of his career, he was not an accurate passer. He did some great things with his legs. He had a ton of intangibles, but I thought Chandler Morris was going to win this job, which in fairness, he did. And he would just keep it for, the entirety of the season. But he went down in the third quarter of that Colorado game, and Max walked in and hasn't let the job back. So they've been able to find a way to get the ball to their playmakers. I spent all offseason talking about Quentin Johnson being a first-round draft pick, and he's only got 200 yards receiving on the year. But it's not because, he's been terrible. It's just because they have so many different guys they're spreading the ball around to. Darius Davis has been fantastic. Tate Barber made some plays last week. I could go down the list, but it's a fascinating game. And the one thing I'll say about TCU is, it sounds strange, I still don't really know completely what this defense is, because the first 2 games of the year they play, Colorado, God bless them, they're not going to win a football game, I don't think.
They suck. They're so bad.
And then Tarleton was their FCS game. SMU, they were able to force a few turnovers, but there were some explosive plays by Tanner Mordecai on that team. And then in the OU game, Dylan Gabriel was struggling, but I think if he plays 4 quarters, then it's just really hard to measure what was going on, because once Bevel came in the game, OU really couldn't do anything on offense. So we'll find out, because Jalen Daniels is fantastic. I know Kansas does a lot of cool things, schematically, that makes it tough for defenses, a ton of misdirection. So that'll be the big test in my mind this week, is can this defense sort of hold up, and we'll sort of get a bigger picture, a fuller picture of where they're at under first-year defensive coordinator Joe Gillespie.
And then, Derek, over to you about winning a 6th game, because after this, they've got at Oklahoma, they're at Baylor, they got Oklahoma State. That's really tough. And they're at Texas Tech after that too. So just getting to 6, Like what, and everything else outside of that, great. What does getting to 6 mean for KU in the program?
Oh, it means so much. It's the proof both from a just, the guys who are on the team trying to get them to wins, both from recruiting locally. That's been a big talk like over this offseason that K-State is doing so much more than KU recruiting locally, and they have been kind of recently. But if you go up to any, 16, 17, 18-year-old, they've seen Kansas State be good for their entire life growing up watching football. That hasn't been the case for KU. So just from like a local recruiting perspective, it's huge as well to see them go to a bowl game. Haven't been to a bowl game, obviously, since 2008 when they played in the Insight Bowl and beat Minnesota. It would be huge for this program to get to that 6th win. And like you said, it's one of those weird things because right now at 5-0, you don't want to just sit there and say, oh, our expectation is only to go in 6 games. But you still can't take it for granted if you do only get to 6 because, like you said, there's tough opponents coming up. The KU Baylor series has been really, really one-sided for Baylor with blowout scores lately. Maybe the OU game is a little bit more winnable than we think, especially last year. KU almost beat Oklahoma in that game in Lawrence, but Oklahoma State looks really good. So there are no gimmies in the Big 12. You can't take anything for granted. If they get that 6th win, I mean, it's going to be, I don't know. Fans might storm Mass Street. Usually that's reserved for like Final Fours or something crazy winning the national championship. But at this point, especially if it's over TCU with game day in town, wouldn't shock me.
Well, also they've been underdogs in 5 of those 6 games. And I mean, let's see, Tennessee Tech, 4 of those 6, 4 of those 6 games. Tennessee Tech, obviously, it's whatever. West Virginia, double-digit underdog. Houston, they were around 9.5 at one point with that one. Duke, they were 7-point favorite. Then Iowa State, they were dogs once again for that one. And now this week, I think it's now a 7-point underdog at home. I mean, I think like, oh my God, storm the streets. And I remember talking to Jesse Newell, now covers Kansas City Chiefs, him saying at 5 wins, they build the statue of Lance Leipold. Well, they're at build the statue range. I'll ask you guys both now, Steven, how does TCU go about winning this football game? What is the key for them? And I was specifically on defense, like what do they do? Because we talked on the show I work on Sirius XM, we talked to Sonny Dykes last week, and he said, our defense is fast. I'm not sure he's all the way sold in, and they shouldn't be yet because of the year they had last year. Not sure he's 110% sold in what this defense is just yet. But what are the keys for TCU to win this game? And really on the defense, what's the key for them to slow down Jalen Daniels?
Yeah, I mean, defensively, they switched schemes here, so they're running a lot of 3-man fronts. And I think the big key is this is something they haven't really had is rushing the passer, and especially with those front 3 guys. Dominic Williams is a true freshman. He's been starting to nose tackle. He's done a really nice job. But it's hard to get pressure from that interior spot. Dylan Horton is kind of their main defensive end who they hope can generate some buzz off the edge. So I think it starts there. In the secondary, they have a lot of experience. They've been kind of inconsistent at times, but Travius Hodges-Tomlinson and Josh Newton are 2 guys that have been asked to do a lot, and they're going to have to play well and play disciplined and make plays. If they can slow down KU in their run game, that'll be a huge key. One guy to watch, so Marcel Brooks, he was a 5-star recruit out of high school. He went to LSU, transferred to TCU a few years ago, and the previous staff didn't really know what to do with him. They moved him to wide receiver last year. That didn't work. And so now he's playing linebacker. He got injured during fall camp, so his first action was against Oklahoma, and he only played about 22 snaps. But he was able to get some pressure off the edge, coming off blitzes. And I wonder if they use him to kind of generate some of that pressure on Jalen Daniels that they haven't been able to get with their defensive linemen so far this year. Some turnovers would help. Offensively, I think it's just sticking with what they do, which is kind of starting with Kendre Miller and Amari DiMercato, those backs in the backfield, and then using that to get going in the pass game with all their wide receivers and Max Duggan. They're going to keep their foot on the gas pedal. I expect this to be a shootout. I think TCU is comfortable if they're in that style of game. And so I don't think they're going to want to play ball control and necessarily help their defense. I think they're most comfortable trying to score and letting their athletes make plays in space.
And then, Derek, what do you think how does Kansas win this football game? What's the keys for them?
Well, I want to see, because it's interesting. The offense had been so explosive, and we hadn't seen any signs of it slowing down through the first 4 games. We saw it against Iowa State. Is that just something that Iowa State did schematically? Is it just Iowa State's defense is that good? I mean, we do know they have typically had a really good defense year in, year out, and it's looked to be that way so far this season. Was it just a bad game from KU? I don't know, because kind of what Steven's talking about there, like, TCU is going to put up points in this game. So the offense is going to have to be able to match for KU. But then also, like, what do we know about the defense? Because the defense has been showing signs of kind of turning the corner here. And maybe that's what it was against Iowa State. You hold them to 11 points. You make big play after big play. Certainly you're not going to hold TCU to that many points. But if you can hold TCU to 35 points, I think, in this game, I don't think you're necessarily guaranteed a win or anything, but I think you might take that going into the game, just knowing how explosive and how great this TCU offense has been. Number 1 in the country in yards per play, 2nd in the country in yards per game, points per game. So if you said, hey, they're going to score 35, I think you probably take your chances and hope that the offense is back to what it was, and that they're able to kind of establish that running game with their spread triple option, because that's part of it too. Is there a book out on KU now with what specifically they're doing with this counter triple option spread type game, to where, you know, teams are starting to pick up how to defend them? Or is it something where this week, even without Daniel Highshaw the injury, you still have Kai Thomas and Savion Morrison, transfers from the Big Ten at Nebraska and Minnesota, that can come in and be talented guys along with Devin Neal? And if they can do that, then I think we should be in for a barn burner, and KU could win the game. And it's kind of funny, because weirdly enough, like, the KU TCU matchup has, I know there's a couple in there, like there was a game KU had 21 yards of offense, but this has been kind of a weirdly competitive series over the last decade or so. We had the 3-point game last year. We had the butt fumble game in Lawrence where TCU lost that game on a weird play. So maybe we have another good one, and I hope we do with game day in town this week.
Steven, my question is, when's a team just going to, like, rush 3 or 4 guys and drop 8 in, like, passing situations against TCU? Because I've been talking about this, and I'll ask you for your keys to the game, but, like, what's the strategy to beat this team? Because there were still some underneath throws last week where Max Doug was just airmailing him. And I was like, is he still kind of that guy a little bit? I didn't know. But what do you think the key is here for TCU to get the job done? Like, what do they have to do well? Or I already asked that. Like, what's your prediction? How do you think this one plays out? Do they do the things that you already talked about a second ago to win? How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, he missed some throws. I mean, I never thought I would say this. I don't really know how much you can take from last week, because Oklahoma's defense was so bad. Like, I think TCU's offense is legit, but they had touchdowns. They had a 73-yard touchdown pass, a 67-yard touchdown pass. Max Duggan had a 62-yard touchdown run, and, like, plays where there was nobody within 5 or 10 yards of guys. So I don't know. I don't really feel like that was a great measuring stick for what they're going to see the rest of the year. I feel like teams will probably drop back and force Max to make some throws. You have to at some point. I feel like the reason teams haven't done that is just because they haven't been able to stop the run. You know, Andre Miller and those guys have been getting things done, running the football, and so you can't really commit to just sitting back and allowing them to sort of take the underneath routes. I'm going to take TCU to win the ball game. I think it's going to be close. I think it's highly contested. But I feel like they score consistently, and I think the defense does enough. I feel like they force a couple turnovers and they win the game. I'm loving what I'm seeing from the energy of the program, the way they're approaching things. I think Sonny Dykes has his team playing loose. They're responding to his voice. And so I don't really see them. You know, I think Kansas can obviously win the game, but if I'm making a prediction, I'll take TCU to win. And I think they score over 40 points. I don't feel like they punk the Kansas defense, but they're effective, and the defense makes enough stops to win the football game.
Derek, what about you?
Yeah, the key to me is something Steven was touching on earlier. Like, how legit is the TCU defense, right? Because, like, if you look at, like, for instance, ESPN's College Football Power Index, they're top 25 defense, and they put up good numbers. But what you mentioned with Colorado and Tarleton State, or is SMU putting up 34 points? Like, is that indicative that you can score on this defense? Because, like I said, KU's defense has been really opportunistic, and it's actually interesting. KU's defensive side of the ball has been one of the better teams in the Big 12 and in the country at limiting big plays. So I do expect TCU to have to maybe grind out drives a little bit more. Last year, they were able to run all over KU, but the run defense has gotten a lot better. But if you can hold the TCU offense down a little bit, what can the offense score here for KU? Jalen Daniels had a down game, didn't even eclipse 100 passing yards. They struggled against Iowa State. It's, can you really get back to what you were doing offensively? If you can, if this is back to the offense that put up 42 in regulation, 55 for the game against West Virginia, and 48 points against a Houston defense that has one of the best pass rushes in the country, then I think KU can win this game. But otherwise, if this is starting to be kind of figured out how to defend this offense and KU can only put up 28 points, 31 points or something like that, then I think TCU can win.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate your all's time. Steven, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yes, I'm on Twitter at SomeGuckSteven. The show Twitter handle is at LockedOnTCU. And then Locked On Horned Frogs, we're on YouTube. You can subscribe there and also wherever you get your podcast.
Derek?
You can find me at D Johnson Radio on Twitter, and it's Locked On Jayhawks. Subscribe and hit us up if you have any questions or anything you want the pod to talk about.
You guys can find me on Twitter at @JoshNeighbors_. Find the show at LOBig12. Find us on wherever your podcasts, all that kind of places, and YouTube. Gentlemen, appreciate it. Looking forward to the biggest game in the Big 12 this weekend.
That's
Appreciate
right.
your all's time.